GW hates me.
The worst.
We gotta start using that piece.
You won't believe what happens next.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
All right, everybody, welcome to the GDFC Podcast, episode number 7. We are joined today by Brian Moy, as always.
Hello, everybody.
Dustin Quibido.
Hey, guys.
And we're very excited to announce we have some very special guests from the Tabletop Titans team. I think we are setting a record today for the most Brians in a single podcast because we have Brian Pullen.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so we're joined by Adrian Phillips.
How's it going, everybody?
And the voice behind the camera, Bridger Hahn.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Not just behind the camera anymore, but in front of it.
That's true.
For as long as that lasted, yeah.
He's back on the golden throne.
Oh,
Yeah.
Brian's rubbing it in.
Yeah, we interned him in the Golden Throne after that one, for sure.
Now that we have all you guys here hostage on the air to our podcast, I want to take a little bit of an introduction question. What are your favorite aspects of 40K? You know, sort of what got you hooked into the game?
For me, it's very straightforward. I love this game because really I just love playing local games, right? Like local multiplayer video games and everything are always my favorite. And just the same thing here, just being across the table from a friend and hanging out. It's just a great way to hang out. So that's always what got me into 40K, and that's what keeps me going with it.
So the thing that keeps bringing me back, it's kind of a cheating answer, but it's the truth, is I can't think of a single other hobby that exists that I can do all of my favorite things at the same time, right? It's all about creativity and building models and then playing with them and competing against other players, and then sort of kind of retelling that and having this amazing community. So it's the fact that it's all the things I love. I love doing painting, I do design work, but I don't normally get to like interact with other people with the thing that I actually made. So it's just this crazy combination of things that has just hooked me since I was a kid and keeps bringing me back.
The hills are alive with the sound of 40K.
That's right.
And then Bridger, what has you put in all this time and effort into the game?
For me, it's definitely the social aspect of the game. When I moved out to California, I made all of my friends through 40K. I learned how to play competitively. I learned how to actually paint models and set up good boards and just have a good time. And so, all of my relationships that I've formed in California have been through 40K.
Yeah, Bridger used to run a lot of the tournaments out here, and that's how I met him. And absolutely, I moved to California only about 4 or 5 years ago as well, and same things. Like my whole social circle came from 40K.
And then what about the GDF crew over here?
Oh, favorite aspect of 40K? I thought we answered this question a long time ago. My favorite aspect, other than stomping Brian, which doesn't happen anymore because, Space Wolves with the OPSEC things finally got FAQ'd. The social aspect, I got to go with that, Bridger. Love just chatting with people. It's so much fun. And like you said, it reminds me of those in-person multiplayer games like GoldenEye, where you can just sit around for 3-4 hours shooting the shit and just having a good time.
Dustin, you love them boys.
I do love them boys, but I got to echo what everyone else is saying. And honestly, I'd never thought about it the way that Brian had kind of encapsulated it. Like, yeah, I love multiplayer games back in the day too, like having LAN parties and like hanging out with friends and like drinking a 2-liter Mountain Dew by myself with nachos. Like, can't do that anymore with multiplayer games, but do that over the hobby store and party with your boys and have a good chat and throw some dice.
Next time we play, Dustin, I'll have 2-liter bottles of Mountain Dew for you and I.
I'm going to spike that blood sugar so I can put you into that comatose state. So, yeah, and I think for me, I'd have to echo a lot of the same ideas because it is this interesting, very unique combination where I've always enjoyed strategy games and, thinking about the games from a tactical perspective, but combining it with sort of this real tabletop experience, the visceral feeling of like throwing all that dice. And the older I get, the more I've actually enjoyed the painting aspect of it well. So it's this really, really, beautiful mix of sort of everything in so many facets to kind of keep you interested in the hobby.
Oh, lucky you. The older I get, the more arthritic I get, the worse my painting gets.
I think it's a bell curve.
the older I get, the more money I have to pay other people to paint for me. So it all balances out.
Amen.
Big brain play.
Big Brian play.
Everyone is drawn to the game. What armies are you specifically drawn to? What is your favorite army in the game?
I don't even know if we can. Adrian and I probably can't answer this too easily. We're like both sitting next to just my shelf of 40K, which is up around 20 factions. And
is that a lot? Is that a big number?
and I have 2 more on my painting table right now, which are like 3,000 point new factions. So I'll cop out.
Squats. Are you painting squats?
I wish I was painting squats. as soon as they make new models, I'll be on it.
10th edition.
I don't know. I'll go with the army that I played the most for the last couple of years, probably the Tau. It's the one I'm most known for. I love the Tau. It's actually the first 40K army I collected. So I guess that gets my vote, but I don't know. I do love a lot of them right now.
Is there something that I guess you'd say that prevents you from just being able to stay in one? Do you find yourself jumping to a fascination with different armies for different reasons, or is there like an underlying common thread there?
I think at 20 armies, it's some form of insanity. It can't be considered reasonable or normal. But I don't have the ability to stop. So I don't know. It's obviously I'm some sort of compulsive person that can't stop. So can't stop, won't stop. Just keep doing it.
That's a masochistic trait for sure.
Yeah, maybe you might make it into like the New England Journal of Medicine or something one day.
Once I had this many armies, I was like, well, I guess we'll start a 40K channel. Like, I don't know what else to do. Like, the funny thing is, starting the YouTube channel almost made me seem not crazy. Like, when I had all the armies, I was just an insane person that had all the armies. But once I start a YouTube channel, I can just be like, no, it's cool. It's for my business. It's a business expense. And I could justify to myself the insanity. I can be like, of course I need another army because, like, the rules are coming out next month and I want to show it on the channel. So really the YouTube channel was just a way to enable my insanity.
So has that amplified your collection rate?
Oh, yes.
For me, I guess, as Brian mentioned, I'm also definitely very guilty. I also have about 20 armies, and it's definitely accelerated with the channel. But a funny thing kind of happened is I've always collected a lot of armies, but with 8th edition being this sort of hard reset of the game, we all kind of had no rules, right? We're just indexes. And so I said, cool, well, I love all these models. I just only played certain ones because they were the most competitive or whatever, and I'd have other ones that never left home. And I said, well, as I get new rules, I'm going to play that army if I own it, right? And it was this really fun way of sort of expanding each part of my collection and like repainting things that were like 10, 15 years old, painting when I was like a little kid. And so this was this great excuse. The problem is I finished 8th edition, and now I'm like, well, I love all these armies. They're all amazing, and now of course they're getting all new rules too. So that's definitely been a thing. But I have to say that my true love, my first love, is the orcs. They're like, the one like humorous faction. I mentioned earlier about the fact that I love to do all the hobbying aspect and painting, converting, and they're of course like, other than like chaos, like the best faction to be able to do that with. So just a ton of fun, and just their playstyle is really, really enjoyable. So the meta will come and go, but I will always love my orcs.
Dustin, I can hear you screaming with joy from here.
Oh yeah, I once you get a taste of kit bashing models in 40K,
man.
You just can't stop doing it. It's so addictive.
I am like the trash dispenser for like all of my friends, where they're like, I have some extra bits. I'm like, I will take them. And I just have like literal mountains of sprues at my house. And like my wife and I were watching TV, we'll just like sit and like cut sprues for like hours, because you can actually get them quite small. But until then, you just have these literal mountains. And I'm like, one day, I kid you not, it was the Forge Fiend legs. I literally bought the kit when I was 12 years old. And 15 years later, I said I wanted to make Scarbrand custom model. And I was like, you know what? I have the bit. And I was like, yes, this is like justifies my entire addiction of bits. But just like digging into that bag and just like looking for stuff to build, there's nothing like it, man.
That's so impressive that you found a way to get your wife to help you model and hobby.
It's very therapeutic. She's like, yeah, I just like zone out, I'm just cutting bits. I'm like, cool, that's weird, but I'm happy.
At this point, I think she would either have to come along or there wouldn't be a marriage at that.
That's right.
I think you can hear the insanity in both of our, like, we both described ourselves very matter of factly. But if you analyze what both of us said, we're both very.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Well, I guess I can be the voice of reason here.
There you go.
I'm like the normal one. I started with like the board games, the Betrayal at Calth and Burning of Prospero. And I was like, oh, this is cool. I was in grad school. I had nothing to do, a bunch of money. So I just bought them, painted them. There was nobody to play with. Nobody on campus played Warhammer or even knew what it was. And then when I moved out to California, people were like, no, you can't. That's just a hodgepodge of randomly painted models. You can't play with that. So I bought Tau. Played Tau for a while.
Oh,
Neon green, super ugly. Decided I only wanted to play the shoot phase. And then I happened upon Custodes, and I've been in love ever since. They play every phase, every reasonable phase, let's say, and they play with and they play with unbridled aggression. And that's just what I love about the faction is you can't ever take your foot off the gas, or you lose immediately.
It's funny. Bridger, I moved to Custodes as my third army. I play pretty much all the Eldari armies and Grey Knights, and I'm like, I need to take a break. I need to just take a psychic phase off every now and then. And that's when I found my love for Custodes.
Yeah, you need to stop clicking around eBay.
Oh, that's a deep pit.
Oh, yeah, don't do it. Bridger just likes to play chess games with like only queens.
Yeah.
That's why he plays Custodes. It's like, I'll just play with 3 queens. Okay, you have your whole army.
I love it because it's such, we talk about it on the channel a lot. Like, oh, this is like a Bridger list, or this is a Bridger play. And it's like, you want to just hammer them super hard. And like, I say that it might sound like a bad thing, but like, it's totally this play style that like Custodes totally encapsulate. And it also serves you well in tournaments, right? You show up and you just like stomp on things because you're just like super hyper aggressive, super durable. All the lists that I played against you, especially in tournaments, have been of that style.
Yeah,
and so it's like super iconic, at least for us.
Bridger's the guy that goes like all in on the first poker hand.
That's right.
Win every game, you don't lose.
Yeah.
Unless you tie.
Then it works every time.
If you do have a lot of interest in armies, are you gravitating more to playstyle, aesthetics, or lore?
At this point, all of those are reasons to collect an army. There's nothing that isn't a reason to collect an army for me. I'd say the first armies I collected were almost all playstyle. But once I got through the playstyles that I cared about, I started doing it for aesthetics and lore. And if anyone who knows, like if you read Black Library books, particularly the Heresy, it's like every single book you feel like you need to walk away building a new army. Yeah. So the lore can absolutely do that to me as well. And so I've been guilty of all of those are reasons why I've started armies.
So this is something that has kind of changed over the years. I started playing competitively 5-6 years ago. This was the 6th edition. And before that, I kind of just played casually with friends, played with my family mostly. And so this really kind of shaped how I approached 40K for a long time, where it was really like trying to play as competitively as possible. And I kind of had armies that I already really loved, but it really guided what projects I was working on, right? And so this was, I think, aesthetics first, followed by playstyle. But one of the cool things about since we started the channel is I was able to kind of come back to my roots, which is just whatever I think is interesting, regardless of rules, no matter how terrible it is, because it's like, yeah, we can just, it's a very different kind of goal where you're just trying to bring some cool models and do something interesting than like trying to play the most hyper competitive list. And of course, this has gotten much better as each edition progresses. The difference between those two things becomes much smaller, which has been really exciting. And again, it was one of the things I'm really excited about 9th edition. But that's been kind of my trajectory as far as like, how do I decide what I'm collecting?
And I thought you did a really nice job of that, Adrian, in the last battle report, the Ynnari versus Iron Hands.
Thank you.
A lot of cool models on there. I would say that Ynnari, I don't think any of us are surprised, are not as competitive as they used to be, but still a ton of fun. And I actually love the Strength from Death, the way that that mechanic works now. I think it's underrated in 9th edition, and I actually think that they're not too far from being viable. Right now, they're not great, but that mechanic alone, I think, is really cool, underrated in 9th edition. Any big takeaways from your last game with Brian?
Yeah, totally. So it was a lot about, really, it's all about movement, right? And this is doubly true with Ynnari that ironically have less movement abilities than any of their original like Eldar counterparts.
Right.
You lose Quicken, you lose a lot of different abilities. And so it was about how can I be kind of cagey when I need to be? How do I commit when I can? And even things like the opening move with the Shining Spears, double, triple checking all my sight lines. And so it was like, cool, I need to get into combat as Ynnari and But really the game was not won by the combat abilities of Ynnari, but it was like kind of these other like flexibility, using strength from death, using Incarnate at the very last moment to kind of bait out Brian.
Yeah.
That was a big moment there. And so it was like, yeah, I can kill things, which was great. It definitely needed to do that, but it was the maneuverability that actually kind of took it in the end.
And you kept your eyes on the prize. You played the mission, right?
Yes.
And ultimately, like my army had like a little castle, Iron Hand's castle up pretty strong. And that castle, he did manage to assail it at the end, but he focused on taking me off those center objectives, and he won the game by robbing me of the primary, ultimately. Right? Like even if you never charged in at the back at the end, still wouldn't have had the points.
Right.
And so he played the mission, even if he was on the back foot right at the very start. He played the mission, and that's how you win the games.
Right. Yeah, and it was like not overcommitting with certain things. Like Yvrain and the Death Jester kind of just sat at the back. They were kind of getting some pot shots. I'd throw the Dire Avengers out when I had to, but they were kind of just sitting there, and that was not something I would have done a long time ago. I would have been like, well, they're just sitting there. That's wasted, right? It's like, no. Being patient with that.
Right. And I know for today's episode, we really want to talk about kind of where are we at with 9th edition. We've had over a month to do a lot of play testing, and I think one of the questions that I'd love to ask you guys, are you finding that 9th edition is even more tailored to playing the mission than 8th edition, whether ITC or the book missions?
Yes, absolutely they are. The missions are a lot more interesting, a lot more, there was honestly just a lot more work put into the design of the missions. And one of the things you'll notice is if you take your foot off the gas on getting the mission at all, the amount of points an opponent could score in even just 1 or 2 turns, like the back half of a game, they can pick up an enormous amount of points. Like you can pick up like 60 plus points in 2 turns. And so if you're not focused on the mission, it really doesn't matter. Just single models grabbing points here and there will swing the game enormously.
Right.
We used to think that you could play for this like crippling of your opponent early game and then coast. You can't coast. You got to keep playing the mission. You got to keep hammering it. It's the only way to win the game.
One thing I've been really loving in the edition too is with the way the primary scoring works, where it's scoring at the start of your turn, I think it really punishes people that don't think ahead several turns. And you really have to have a solid plan in your mind, what you would not just what you want to accomplish this turn, but also making sure you're setting yourself up for the next and even the turn after that.
Yeah, it really changes the pacing of the game in a really healthy way, I'd say. There's a lot less of, you can't just pop out, nuke some off a point, pop away or whatever. You have to think at least, 2 turns ahead, and it's super asynchronous, right? We're like, well, I'm doing this thing this turn, but really it doesn't matter until the next turn. In many ways slows the pace of the game down, but in such a good and tactical way.
Yeah, and it's not enough to even just score your points, right? You've got to be denying. So I think it's so much more to keep in your head. Certainly the ITC missions, particularly at the end, I think we all had them pretty dialed in.
Yeah.
And almost every army could get almost max points every turn. And it just came down to like who got bonus 1 or 2 times more. That's not how this game is going at all. And you're seeing people who really think ahead and really deny their opponent their secondaries a lot more effectively. You can really blow out an opponent big in this game if you're thinking a couple steps ahead and you're denying them and they're not doing the same to you. The person who plays the mission can go so far ahead.
I think you guys just mentioned like 3 key things that are really impacting list building: the secondary denial, the ability to hold an objective to your next turn. I think those are things that are just so critical, right? In every army is going to have to think about like, how do I factor in for like resiliency? How do I factor in denying secondaries, or how am I going to pick up secondaries in this 9th edition? Which I think is a huge, maybe not a huge change, but it's a big deviation from 8th edition.
Yeah, I think another big thing people don't quite realize and have not adjusted to enough is there's a great deal of economy of action in how you're scoring your points, where you need to make sure you have enough on a point that you're not going to lose it, but you can't overcommit to 1 point because it does reward you for holding multiple points and moving out and taking points away from your person. There's a lot more calculus sort of involved there. And I think people are used to, in the ITC, we're just like, oh, I can stick one thing on this point, I got it, I'm good. Mm-hmm. And this whole mechanic of, no, you got to survive their whole turn, throws a big wrench into that mental calculus you're doing when you're planning out your turns.
Yeah, it was a total 180 from the ITC missions previously, where explicitly the game was primarily about killing, right? That was half of your points in primary, that was a ton of the secondaries. And it was like, cool, the game's about killing, and movement and board control was a tool to get that done. And now we're seeing it's the complete opposite, right? Cool. The game is explicitly about holding objectives, and now killing is the tool that you use to get that one done, which just like is completely different than what everyone's used to, which I think is great.
Yeah, and the thing that's important about that is the swap to killing not mattering and the change to the way they wrote the secondaries. It unlocks so much more list building creativity. If I was to kind of say one thing that I'm most excited about Ninth, it's this idea that so many more diverse builds are viable, and so many of the builds that you wish you could have played, the builds that kind of fit the flavor of the armies, they actually become not just playable but good. And that's what I love to see. I love to see that we could reach deeper into our collections and they become more, there's a lot more viable units and strategies.
Do you have an example of that you're recently working on, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. Like even, we talk about something like orcs, right? Like there was this one way of playing orcs and like these 3 units that worked. They have a massive range of models. And all of a sudden, so many more, right? Like small boy squads and buggies and trucks and,
Coptas are so much better than
Coptas are interesting.
Coptas
There's so many more things that all of a sudden become interesting and they can play a meaningful role. And it's just great. I love to see that diversity. I love to be able to bring that creativity to list building because it felt like 8th edition, particularly at the end, everyone was just like, here's the one approved net list and I'll make, a 10% change to it. And that, that's boring.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Dustin, I hate to put you on the spot, but I'd love to just get an idea as to where are you at with 9th edition now?
Yeah, it's tough. I think I've kind of spun myself back into my cocoon of rethinking through the the Orc Codex and seeing what works and what doesn't work. For me, it was really tough coming into 9th from the get-go. Is that I took a lot of the same ideas that I had in 8th and said, okay, let's reapply them to 9th, see how they work, and just tweak it. But there's so many fundamental changes and differences between 8th and 9th for an Orc player that I don't think you could just immediately assume that your list that did well, at a major last year is going to do well this year. So it's been starting back from scratch. Been enjoying that process, through smaller Crusade games and slowly working through it. But we'll get there.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's cool to see is like people have to fundamentally say, well, why am I taking this thing, or why? What's the assumption that was being made that kind of held true for 2 or 3 years, however long 8th edition was, and it's like, oh wait, this was good because of this specific interaction or way that we scored, and that's just gone. So these things that maybe used to be trash are actually quite useful, and vice versa, unfortunately.
So we see sort of this fundamental shift in the mission and how the game is being played, and we have a little time to sort of adjust our armies. Bridger, where do you sort of see you taking your armies?
Yeah, so my favorite part of 9th list building is that you just take the things you want to now. Especially for Custodes, there used to be a lot of really painful tax units. Like you had to bring so many Custodian Guard, and they wouldn't really do anything the whole game. But now I can just look at the Codex and be like, all right, there's only like 9 or 10 units, but I can just make an entire army out of one of them. Like I could take Alaris Terminators and be like, what would an entire Alaris Terminator army look like? What would it do? How would it play the game? That's like really exciting to me that you just take whatever you want in 9th. You just take the stuff you like, and it's probably pretty good. So I'm looking at like crazy off the wall builds. Like what if all tanks? What if all dreadnoughts? All Terminators? All bikes? Like all these lists that you couldn't really play in 8th other than all bikes.
And you could splash just 3 models of this, 3 models of that because they're not giving up kill points. So it's like, hey, you want like just 3 Ventari Custodes. You never would have taken them before because it's like, oh, am I going to commit to like a big blob of them? But now, hey, who cares? Take 3 of them. They're not giving up a kill point. They'll go grab a secondary for you. It's all good.
I love that about 9th edition, that it's a lot less about what are you bringing as opposed to how are you using it.
Yeah, I've always been one to build my list with this. I have an idea of what I want my units to sort of do. And I started, just for fun, bringing this Highlander style list with my Space Wolf, and it's been stupidly effective. As you can kind of attest to, Brian. And really, it's because I think when you have such an emphasis on the primary like that, you can use all these units in all these very interesting ways to kind of do so. And again, it really does come down to how you're moving them around on the tabletop.
I don't want to say that people are sleeping on the Space Wolves, but I think they're a lot better in 9th edition and today than a lot of people are giving them credit for.
Well, you gotta, I think, lean in a little bit to what your army is good at. So one thing that I found the Space Wolves be excelling at is really I can sit on a point and to come and get it, you have to brawl me off of it, because if you try and get close, I can heroic intervene into you. And really the only way you're getting it is in combat, and that's, Space Wolves are going to excel there. And they're just a tough army. They can get a lot of high toughness, a lot of good involves, and they'll sit on points, and then they'll outbrawl you.
Yeah, Brian, number 3, in your game against Bridger with Space Wolves, you brought a very interesting list. It was a very fun game. Bridger, I don't mean to bring up any PTSD or some bad memories, but any takeaways from the Space Wolves perspective from you, Brian?
Space Wolves are still Space Marines, and at the end of the day, they still have a lot of the things that make Space Marines really efficient and really strong. I love playing the Space Marine or the Space Wolves the way they're meant to be played, which is, up close with your tooth and claw, with all that sort of stuff. But we've got a deep bench of Space Wolves models here that rarely see play, and we love just bringing stuff to the table that you don't get to see all that often. So we went with some more old school stuff. We had some Predators, we had Stormwolf and Stormfang, because they're weird and wacky and wonderful models. I actually was going to bring 3. I was going to bring 2 Stormwolf and 1 Stormfang, but they're so expensive. They're like 300 points each. So I had to draw the line somewhere. But I don't know. They still shoot like Space Marines. They still got their reroll bubbles. They've still got their good ballistic skill. And ultimately, Custodes can get shot. And Bridger didn't roll like 3 ups, which is his one. That's like the one job he was given when the Emperor gave him the Custodes, and he just didn't do it, so they died.
Bridger's also in a fetal position on the ground right now.
Were there any other takeaways from your perspective, Bridger?
So the prevalence of flat 2, 3 d6 damage in the game is going up, right? So there's this perceived tank meta now that everybody wants to take the vehicles that they weren't allowed to take in 8th. So also people are taking all these anti-tank weapons, and those weapons happen to be really good against Custodes. So I do have to worry a lot more about line of sight than I used to. At LVO, I brought a list that just didn't care about anything. It was like 25 Storm Shields. And I got used to playing that way. I got used to saying like, oh, what does line of sight matter? Like I'll just tank it. You can't do that.
That's a great point about flat damage, though, because I think one of the strengths of Custodes is the inconsistency for your opponent, right? 4-up invulns and feel no pains for things like the Warlord trait makes it so unreliable to know exactly how much firepower you need to kill something. And the flat damage definitely has been hurting them. I played a game yesterday with my Harlequins versus them, and the fact that I knew, cool, I can get exactly 2 damage on each of these hits against like the bikes was crucial. Whereas D3s, which were much more prevalent before Psychic Awakening, especially, was like, well, I need to hope I roll high. If I roll low, then he's going to start offsetting damage, and combine that with things like Feel No Pain and minuses. That was something that they did well with.
Yeah, and a big thing for Custodes that mattered in that match a whole lot was the new Lookout Sir rule, right? Like the Custodes care about their Vexilla an awful lot. Like you could see Bridger, when he finally deep struck, he didn't make his charge, even though he had 3d6 rerollable to do it. He failed, and it can happen. It sucks. But if you're making a 3d6 rerollable 3-inch charge, not even Bridger can fail that one. And
challenge accepted.
The problem is that his banner got killed, and it got killed while he still had like 8 custodians in front of him, but they were all 2-man squads, and that didn't used to be a thing. And now Custodes, I think, get hit worse than any other faction on that, because they're taking 3-man squads. So all you have to do is pop 1 model, and then you could get into those characters.
Yeah, that's where I've seen a shift. I started to really favor the characters. Like I kind of term them as brawling characters that can survive things like Arjag, who's -1 damage, 3-up invul, and 2+ armor. And these characters can just kind of get in the thick of things, and really they're 2-up armor or a T5 or things like that kind of make them immune to small arms. I find I'm getting a lot of value out of those guys. And it's not just because of Touch of the Well, maybe it is because of Touch of the Wild and them being Marines, but
well, we saw it in that game, right? Brian put everything into that captain in the shooting phase and did literally 0 wounds. And the captains are kind of that same role where it's like, it sounds like such a bad idea to put all these buffs on one character and throw them out there, but they can tank a ton of firepower, and you just don't know, like, am I going to kill him? Maybe not. When you throw Ragnar in with Touch of the Wild, it doesn't matter, but
when in doubt, just let Ragnar clear it up.
He's so good.
Oh, it's absolutely absurd.
So another big change in 9th edition really is the terrain. And I think people are still sort of feeling up how to set up their tables. And I really enjoyed your guys' discussion on this and some of your reports and how you've been setting up tables and things that you make for a good game. So what are the ingredients? What goes into basically making a good table for a compelling 9th edition game of 40K?
I'll tell you what, Brian makes every single one of our boards, so we'll let him talk.
Sure. I love terrain. And terrain matters a ton, right? Like anybody who's saying they're having bad games, I'm almost positive it's because they're doing terrain wrong. And this was true in 8th edition. I think we all just kind of got used to it. And of course, if you remember, 8th edition only worked because we all collectively agreed to the ground floor blocks line of sight rule. Without that, you can imagine 8th edition was just completely broken game. And a lot of people didn't even play with that rule and their games were not great. So you definitely have to, I would say, try to build a board where both players' armies could be completely hidden from one another turn one if they chose to be. Maybe that's at a cost. Maybe they're further back than they want to be, or maybe they're in a corner they don't want to be in. But 100% of their models should be able to be hidden from shooting turn one. I think that's really crucial. I think another little thing that we discovered after our second or third game was don't put one single giant ruin in the center of the board. That is a horrible idea because as soon as something touches that ruin, they can see the entire board. So what you want to have is 2 separate or 3 separate obscuring buildings in the middle of the board so that when you touch one, there's still a huge kind of invisibility cones using that obscuring. And I would generally say like pepper in a bit of the dense cover. I'm really loving the dense cover, which is the -1 to hit. It's really impacted several of our games. Like our Death Guard Orcs game, which is I think one of our most popular, dense cover was huge in that game. And so I really think you want to do that.
Yeah, I want to touch on a little something that you sort of mentioned was that if you're setting up in a position at cost, because one thing I find when setting up a good board is that any good strategy game, right, really is broken down to just a series of choices. And the more choices you have in the game, whoever makes the most correct ones wins the game. So you want to implement good tactical choices in your terrain, where in general, stronger positioning puts you at higher risk. So it's always a decision of, do I want to get in this position at the potential cost of losing more units? So one thing we do in our setups is, again, like you can hide from your opponent. I do think it is very important having that ability to hide from your opponent. But if you want to fully hide, you're going to have to give up something, such as forward positioning or ability to sort of like leap on these objectives. So everyone that's setting up your boards, I think you want to pinpoint where the important parts of the map, which is usually the objectives, and then think about how you're creating interesting choices for being on those objectives.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've kind of become cognizant of that now that we've played tons of games, is making sure that there's not too many easy gimmies, right? So like you mentioned, having to make these decisions, not just having all the objectives right next to a ruin that has no windows that you can just hide behind in the building, because that's a very 8th edition paradigm, and maybe having one or maybe 2 of those that do that. But generally speaking, yeah, you are having to make these decisions. I think that's a big thing.
We also think it's important, to make terrain that's beautiful and a board that looks fun to play on and exciting. And, terrain has always been the third army for us, right? Like we treat it like it's another army we're bringing to the table. Yeah. So we think that's really, it brings a lot of energy and a lot of fun, and it makes these games really memorable. I know that's not often possible in tournaments, but I'd love to see a little bit more personality put in to most people's terrain. And the other thing I would say is while you can't do this in tournaments, in your home games you can, we tailor our terrain to the match. So we'll say, cool, here's one combat army, here's one shooting army against each other. What terrain would help make this more fun, more interesting, give more tactical decisions? So we think about the terrain in context of the matchup. It's not just random board and, do the best you can.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And as far as the aesthetics, we had this kind of guiding principle, at least through 8th edition, especially when we got started, which was we actually made like secret ITC boards where they would have the kind of structure of a like tournament board, in that they're kind of fair, they're relatively symmetric, but then we'd have ways of sort of making it look more interesting, making it feel asymmetric, scatter and things like that. So that, yeah, we're still playing on like a fair and almost tournament legal board, but it feels very narrative, right? And that's something that's super important, I think. And then in regards to what the other thing you were saying, Brian, about making sure it's a good matchup, I think people are really afraid of changing things for the actual game, right? They're saying, well, this is, you have to be prepared for any sort of situation or whatever. We have to remember a couple things. One, in the book, they literally say put down the objectives and then set up the terrain. So it's more flexible than ever. That's like literally kind of gospel by GW now. Another thing is the kind of horrible matchups on terrain that you run into at tournaments shouldn't exist, right? That's something that ideally we just completely avoid. So I think being open to adjusting your games, even if it's just at home, to make it an interesting match is super important.
Oh, amen to that. I mean, there are almost no worse feel-badsy types of feelings than if you get at the worst side of the table and you're like, all right, game's over. Let's just pack it up and move on to the next game.
Exactly.
As sad as it is, like that's one of the reasons my Tau were so strong, because a lot of the local tournaments around here just couldn't afford terrain.
Yeah.
And so it's like 9 times out of 10, I was rolling up to Planet Bowling Ball with like a 2-inch 3D printed ruin. It's not going to hide anything. That's horrible. Horrible for everyone else. Awesome for the Tau Empire. But you know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't be like that. You need if you're having bad games, it's almost certainly terrain.
Absolutely.
Another good thing about 9th edition, right, is the fact that we have keywords now. Yes, a ruin that's 5 inches tall technically always has the obscuring keyword, but you can give anything the obscuring keyword, right? We have like this weird nid table, and you say, okay, cool, well, these have spores or whatever, so this is going to be obscuring. And so it takes these pieces of terrain that were kind of really cool looking before, but functionally useless in the game, and you just tack a keyword on them, and suddenly they're playable again, and you're using all those fun toys that you just had sitting on the shelf.
For everyone out there, you really should be experimenting with terrain and terrain rules as much as you are probably experimenting with new lists.
100%.
Like
Yes.
And I love the challenge to the community here, right? It's the third army, and you want to treat it like it is like one of the most valuable things. And I know something at GDFC, which we value, is terrain and trying to build beautiful tables as well. And we've got a couple of guys that are really good at it. But just to everyone out there, I mean, good games really are predicated on having nice terrain. So, take care of it, treat it, respect it, and I think you're going to have much better games in 9th edition.
These things can take a little while, take a little bit of practice. If you maybe are struggling a little bit with your army and adjusting to 9th and really kind of you're kind of down on the faction, you have to fight Marines every time. What do you guys have recommendations to that player that might feel a little bit stuck, might feel a little bit down about the condition for their army in 9th edition?
Great question.
I guess I should probably talk about this because there was a dark time in 8th edition where I gave up on Custodes because at the release of Marines, they just felt too strong. And I felt like I couldn't compete. I had an infamous game with Brian where he was playing Iron Hands and I was playing Tank Custodes. And I took my first turn, got line of sight, everything I wanted, shot everything, did like 4 damage. Passed the turn, lost my whole army, and the game was over. And I felt really bad. But the solution was not to just like whine and wallow in sadness and quit playing 40k. What I did was I just tried other armies. I switched to Ultramarines myself. I switched to Blood Angels. I switched to Raven Guard. Like I just played other stuff, and I thought, now I will note those were all Space Marine armies, but I just switched to other armies to see, what am I enjoying? Because if I'm not enjoying this, I should try other things. I shouldn't just give up.
Bridger says, become what you hate.
Give in to your hate.
Honestly, one of the things I do is try to roll up to a table in a no-lose scenario. And what I mean by that is I brought things that I'm excited about that I'm going to have fun with either way. If you crush me with them, like, cool, good for you. I still had a great time. I brought an army that I loved that I worked on. And I look for little wins like, hey, did I do some great tactical play? Did I learn some cool lessons? So if you're if you're stuck with one faction, you can't necessarily be changing factions. Just go for the things that you love in that faction and go with it. And, if you're playing from behind and maybe you don't win all your games, take pride in the victories you do get and take pride in, even if you lose by 2 or 3 points, that was a hard one, those are hard won points and you still played a great game. And I think that's always worked for me.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that, Brian. That's great advice. And I also think there's just so many different ways to play 40K in 9th edition. So you don't always have to be playing the Grand Tournament package. Play a Crusade game, right? And there's just different ways to enjoy it. So change it up a little bit.
Well, if you're playing casual games with your friends, not tournament, right? You should never roll up to a table unless you want to with a super mismatched game, right? Like one of the things I play in a narrative club here in California, and one of the first things that they taught me was you have a discussion with your opponent prior to the game. Like, what kind of game are we going to play? What do you want? Like, oh, you really want to bring your giant squigoth? Cool. I'll make sure I don't bring like 50 meltaguns that drop at turn 1 so that we can have a fun matchup here. Like, we actually plan a game that's going to be fun and interesting. So if your friend has some OP faction, why not encourage them to explore a bit more of their codex, maybe some of the units they don't get to play with all the time because they're not the most efficient, and you can balance a game internally. Again, you can't do it in tournaments, but for your friendly games, you should absolutely be doing that.
Yeah, really the sort of myth of the legend of that guy and the whack player and things like that really shouldn't exist if you don't want it to. You just have that agreement beforehand. I mean, I've had some of my best games of Warhammer have been playing with really bad armies. But if you're both equally bad, if you've both sort of met at whatever the level is, right? How hard of units are you bringing? Whatever, you can have an amazing game of Warhammer. You don't want one person to feel like they don't have the tools. But something that I also have learned through a lot of my own suffering is to consider the long game, right? Things come and go, things will get better, things will get worse, and to sort of take that not as this moment to kind of be upset about things, but as a moment to try something different. And you can do this without changing factions too, right? So obviously I play orcs. They have I've had a lot of ups and downs. I was working on my freebooters list right when 9th edition dropped. I was super happy with it. Now freebooters are super expensive and not great, but it means, I'm going to be trying something else in the codex, try some different units maybe I haven't used before. And I know that eventually it'll come back around again. There's so many times I've had people say, well, I sold these models because they were so terrible in this edition. Now they're amazing again, So I think keeping that in mind that you're probably going to be around for a while, be adaptable to that. And if you're open to it, I'm super guilty of this. I'm constantly changing and converting my models. I'll pop off arms, change them up. I have 2 chimeras that for the longest time were wyverns, and I just converted them back to their original chimeras for my GSC because, hey, guess what? Chimera is interesting again, and I was super excited to put these models back on the table, and it all comes around again. We've seen it time and time again.
Hashtag magnets.
Yeah, that's preach.
That's all that I hear.
Today's sponsored by the Magnet Baron. Get your magnets on sale.
Yeah. And I think really the whole, COVID-19 situation is really a blessing in disguise for that because, at least in our area in Chicago, right, there's no tournaments going on. I have no competitive event I'm trying to prep a list for, so I'm free to just pull all these models off the shelf and just get these models that I love using and get them into the game and get those fun little moments. One thing, sort of when Brian was mentioning creating these little goals for yourself. And I have my 2 Phobos lieutenants, they're competing for knife kills, particularly any Marine kills that they could get when other Marines had doctrines and Space Wolves did not yet. And I actually tally on the bottom of their bases how many knife kills they have against other HQs. And little things like those go a long way to just, make sure you're having a good game.
Pretty sure half of those are my solitaire.
No, the Eliminators punched that one down.
Yeah, let's not talk about that one.
That's so cool.
So one of the things that I think a lot of our listeners are curious about, what are some of the pros, cons, challenges of playing many different armies versus maybe just focusing on a single faction?
It's amazingly challenging. Oh my God. We play a different faction. Both of us play a different faction every single week. And currently, twice a week. Don't remind me. It's so much. And the truth is that these factions are more complicated than they've ever been, right? They've got their codex. They've got their psychic awakening. You've got all the new 9th edition rules, all the new mission to keep in mind. We're putting on a show at the same time. It's a ton to keep track of. And some of these factions, although we own them, it's a while between games, right? It might be months or even half a year between when we played them last. And especially right now, it's an edition ago. It's pre-Psychic Awakening or something like that. So a lot of times, it's not just that we're playing so many factions. It feels like we're playing them over and over again for the first time because the meta keeps shifting and the way you play them keeps shifting. And we play a different army list every single time as well. We never play the same list twice. So it's very challenging, but we just put a ton of prep time, right? We sit down with our codex, with our Psychic Awakening. We meticulously write our lists. For me, I write these very lengthy cheat sheets where I have every single stratagem that I would use written out, and I categorize them by unit, and I write out all my characters. I have little cheat sheets of what all my characters do, all my pregame strats all written out, the order of my psychic powers. So that's the only way I keep it straight, is I just write these elaborate cheat sheets.
That is great advice. Well, one of the things I love to do, especially with stratagems, is write them out in the order of the phases that they can be used in. So like pregame, going into movement, shooting. So I can look at, hey, if I'm in my opponent's shooting phase, here are the list of stratagems I have available to me. So I'm just following along as the game goes, and that helps me keep in mind what options do I have available to me.
Yeah, one other thing that's been really helpful is obviously it means that each of these factions, generally speaking, we might not have as much, it's sort of jack of all trades kind of thing. But we still have factions that we really like that we might be playing particularly often at the moment, very competitively. And so by playing all these different factions, it's definitely tough, like Brian said. But you also get this insight into what your opponent is bringing. And I think that's so much of the game. Like there is just this insane repository of information that you have to know when you go to a table. Do you know about, stooping dive in, or do you know about Vect or whatever, and a million like smaller, more obscure strats that you would never even know until it's too late. And so while it can definitely be overwhelming, it's really, really, really important and really useful to be able to kind of know all of those and be familiar with how they actually work, right? So Ynnari with Shining Spears back in the day, and I was like, oh, blah, 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 Ynnari is so powerful. And then I tried to play it. And yeah, it's still broken as all get out. But I learned all the things that have to go right, and in what way and in what order. So the next time I played against them, I was like, okay, cool. So I need to stop this thing from happening or whatever. And I just, in theory, I knew it, but I didn't realize it until I actually sat down at the table and tried to play it myself.
So one thing that we do to learn other armies is we will sit and play like a test game. And so we will both work together to play both sides. And like, what is the optimal move here? What's the optimal move there? And getting these different perspectives of saying, like, would you use the stratagem here? Let's see what happens if you do. Would you not use the stratagem here? Okay, let's see what happens. And just going down all these avenues and trying to learn, how is this army trying to play? What works for this army? What doesn't? By working together with a friend, an opponent at the time, but really you're just working as a unit to try to figure out, like, how should this matchup play out? How should this army try to play? Is massively beneficial to figuring out a new faction.
Yeah, I think that's some really good advice. It's something I find myself doing a lot when I play with newer players or people that aren't, as versed in sort of the tactics and competitive scenes. And when you approach the game as a commutative, we both want to have a good game kind of thing, try and learn from each other, you both are going to improve very quickly.
I love that comes through in your battle reports.
Yeah, that's definitely something we try to, right? It's like, we all are very competitive people, but we're also all friends, right? And we all love Warhammer. And so it's like, how do you kind of capture that spirit of like, we're just going to show up and play a game of Warhammer. We're going to play it really well, and we're going to try to beat the crap out of each other, but we're going to have a good time while doing it, right? And that's the goal, right? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, although you wouldn't know from the social groups and everything, the worst part of 40K, is the saltiness. And it's a game. It's a game that we play. We're grown men playing with our little toys, and it can be just pure joy all the time. Even when you roll horribly, it can be you can laugh it off, and it can be one of your most memorable games if you choose for it to be. And that's the energy we bring to the game, because that's genuinely how we feel. It's fun no matter what happened, and especially when there's people watching. My misery is someone else's joy on stream.
Yes.
And I can feel that. You can feel that, like, this crazy, horrible thing that just happened for me is an exciting moment for you watching, and that's cool for me too, right? Like, I think that's fun.
I don't know how this happened, Brian, but somehow you became the heel of the channung. I feel like everyone's rooting against you these days.
Well, if you've seen my rolls, I think it's earned.
Ungodly.
As of recent, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, don't watch our first battle report. Adrian started off strong. Our very first battle report was he just had dice that were on fire, and I was like, "What have I done? This is what he's bringing this energy." But yeah, no, you're right.
And I love that you guys are using the same dice, just so that people can't claim that you're using weighted dice or anything like that.
People are so superstitious, and I've seen it in a million different ways in a million different events and games, and so. Yeah, it's like, no, they're cursed, but just for me, it's fine.
Yeah, I've taken these same dice to tournaments, and I've seen people give me looks when I've rolled this way. They're like, no way those dice are legit, Brian. But no, they're legit. I just roll good sometimes.
Oh, it's so bad. I have some Warhammer TV dice, and people get super wigged out by it. They'll be like, "Wow, you're getting Warhammer TV a lot," and I was like, "You can roll them, it's fine." And they'll like roll whatever average, and they're like, "Okay, fine." But like they notice it so much when it pops up, right? That they're just like, "Yep, something's up." And like, no, they're just cool.
I love that confirmation bias.
Exactly, yeah. But like it's those moments of drama, right? Like I know I'm gonna roll. Like here's the perils, Brian. Of course I roll it. 9 times out of 10, and then all the F's in chat, and like I love that. That's something that it's like it's so much fun, right? Even if it ends up horribly for you, it's this really exciting, dramatic moment. And Brian loves to do this thing, which drives me crazy, where he's like, "So all you have to do, Adrian, is not fail this like 3-inch charge, and you win the game." I'm like, no, I don't want to say it because if we say it, then it's gonna happen and it's gonna be true. There's nothing I can do about it. But he'll like sort of build up the drama. I'm like, yep, it's gonna happen.
Oh, he's incepting it to happen.
I know, that's the thing.
Absolutely, that's the trick.
That's what happens when you're jacked into the universe.
And I think the real beauty of it too is, as you guys mentioned, and to echo what Brian says, you guys do a very good job on your stream doing this. And then, like when you're truly invested together in the outcome of the game, like you can really get to a point where you are cheering when the other person has a great success. Like that person that rolls that double sixes for a charge makes it in for that heroic move. Like that's just exciting. Like, even if it does ultimately mean your downfall, but I mean that's the stuff you're going to be talking about after the game. Keep you coming back the next time.
Exactly.
So with all the streaming and all the sort of like practice games, what do you guys have sort of cooking on it? Or cooking in the background of Tabletop Titans? What big things do you guys have coming up?
Well, we have something we've been kind of planning for a while, and we're super excited to be announcing it kind of today. This will be the first one. We're starting how many T's is it? Tabletop Titans tournament.
It's 4 T's.
T4, T-Quad. And so what we're doing is, we've talked about on the show so far the fact that there are no tournaments, right? We can't really kind of play that. We play competitively here, but we wanted to sort of recreate that feeling. And so what it's going to be is a 7-round single elimination tournament. We're bringing 8 armies, kind of 4 of our favorites from each of us, and we're going to be playing them. And of course, one of the interesting things for me personally is these are definitely like our armies and they're kind of our babies, but we have no idea who's going to win these matchups, right? So it could be we end up having to pilot the other person's army as we go through, and it really becomes this kind of discussion around what are these armies, what are the builds, what's happening now in the meta, even if it's our own tiny little meta. And so that's kind of the big thing we've been cooking up. We're starting it this Saturday, the 21st.
Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, it's basically we're just doing like 3 games a week. 3 games a week, so it'll take 2 weeks and 1 day, and the 1 day is our big finale. So we're excited. Yeah, we're really never seen a format like this before, where the same 2 people pilot all the armies through a tournament. It should be pretty fun and interesting, but it's a product of our times right now. So,
and it's kind of like coming back to we did obviously coverage of a ton of the armies, almost all the armies, and we did games covering them. And we started to kind of come back to them as we've had sort of this availability. But again, these are the armies that we really love. And it's been fun to kind of come back and say, okay, now I understand 9th edition, hopefully. What would I try to do that's interesting, that's fun, that's different, and would I actually like take to an event for?
And this is the first time we're playing the GT missions on stream. So far, we've stuck with just the book missions, but we've played every book mission, 3-4 times now. Yeah. So it's time to start digging into the GT missions, which are pretty similar, but there's some fundamental changes that are important, and we're going to show some of those tactics. We're going to go a little harder on each other than we normally do, hold each other to the rules a little tighter than we normally do, and really show how these armies could be piloted through a competitive event.
Very nice. That's exciting. I do want to just call out that there's an opportunity here to get 6 Ts if you do a Tabletop Titans Tabletop Simulator tournament.
Love it.
And then
it's a huge missed opportunity. You're absolutely right.
That's right.
You're hired as our brand manager.
And
there we go.
And the tiebreakers, you just got to say that 5 times fast.
Yeah, and you can never mention it without saying the full title.
It's like Drazhar, Master of Blades.
Oh, that's super exciting. So is it going to be Adrian and Brian, or Bridger? Are you going to get in on this action as well?
I don't think I'll be playing any games. We want to keep the acting at its peak, and we want to keep the production at its peak. So I'll stay behind the camera for that.
The actual production of the show, the live production, is very complicated, as Adrian can attest to.
Oh my god!
There's a million buttons, right?
Yeah, he's like, okay, so this is like locked to this thing on the keypad, and we have a what's it called?
The Stream Deck. It's like a little mini keyboard,
which like helps somewhat, but I made like a little guide and everything. There's a million things you have to do while working on chat and stuff like that. And so we've all like worked on the tech together, but Bridger's been the one that's kind of become the master of it. And so I already knew that you did a lot, but it was definitely like this sort of newfound like, oh my god.
Yeah, well, if you've ever seen like a live sports or news broadcast, there's like a control room with like 9 people. Bridger is those 9 people. We have like as many cameras or more than an evening news show by far.
He's also the server tending to the needs of the cameras. If one like overheats or needs a battery or something's off, and he's like trying to answer chat, and he like runs over in the background and like does his thing. Like Bridger and I were just playing Warhammer. I mean, Brian and I are just playing Warhammer, but Bridger's like running around in the background. It's nuts.
Yeah, so that's why we don't do his job, because we don't know.
It's the man behind the screen. So Bridger, all the love out to you guys and all the other men and women behind the screen doing all the work.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
So we do have a few questions from our Discord server that we wanted to take an opportunity to sort of ask you guys, because you are playtesters. So one of the questions from Nathan H was, what is the playtesting experience like? Is it more iterative? Or does GW just throw a book at you and ask you to play it until you found anything broken?
Yeah, so there's a few nuances here. So first, unfortunately, I wish we were all playtesters, because then we would get to playtest together. Unfortunately, only I'm on the playtest team, but the whole Tabletop Titans crew is on what's called the preview team. And the preview team gets finished rules like, a month or a couple weeks before they release. As far as playtesting, though, then I'm typically working on a book with other local playtesters. Unfortunately, some of them live pretty far, so we have to drive pretty far to meet each other to play. But anyways, we're typically working on a book maybe a year before it comes out. And GW has a fairly complicated and always changing and updating system. They have different kinds of playtesters that focus on different pieces. People focus on points, people focus on narrative, people who focus on facts, people who focus on doing what I do, which is called breaking. I try to break the game. And so they trust me to find lists that are completely unreasonable and be abusive and find all those gotchas and things like that. But there's other people who like go through and try to make sure that the relics are interesting. Because as much as like it's my job to find the bad things or the things that are too good and that makes them bad, other people go through and find things that are like not good enough and need to become better. That's not something I'm super focused on. And so, yeah, it is iterative, but you don't get a lot of time. So, we'll get the book, we'll read through it. If there's anything obviously broken, we'll send off emails. Otherwise, we'll play a couple games, try to validate some hypotheses about what's the most broken build. But you can't really play that many games. It takes a lot of time and you got a lot of books. So, and you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone a year from now. Like, what does the meta look like? What's actually strong? Because you might end up saying, hey, this is broken, but it's actually perfectly balanced for a already broken meta a year from now, right? And so that all makes it extremely challenging. So really, you only find the obvious flaws in this process.
Mike from our channel was asking if you guys could wave a magic wand and could change any aspect of 40K, what changes would you guys make?
The competitive 40K Facebook group needs to be so much less salty. Can I use my magic wand?
Could not agree with
magic wand for that.
Yeah, people just need to chill. It's a cool game, and that's the number one thing that brings me down about this game. Honestly, is that people sometimes get a little too worked up, and they're super mean to all the nice folks at Games Workshop, who I swear to you love this game and work so hard on it. And it's a hard job to write the rules for this game. And they're so mean to them. So just be nicer to Games Workshop people. They deserve it.
Yeah, I guess my only magic wand would be to do the impossible and release all the new codexes at once. I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, right? People are like, oh, Space Marines get all this stuff. And it's like, well, so they are the poster boys, which means they're going to get the new updates. And everyone else is going to get updates as well. And so, at the end of that period, it'll be much better, especially for factions that are maybe not so happy right now. But the reality is you can't really produce that amount of content and publish it and release it all at once. So, if we just had some magic to just make that happen, that'd be great.
If I had to pick one thing, it would probably be something that they're actually already working on, which is just digital distribution of rules. I think that a lot of the issues that we run into with the game is like, ooh, how does this rule work? This is a bit ambiguous. And the FAQs come pretty slowly because they're effectively print FAQs, right? They go to a digital PDF, but it's a print procedure of making them. So it's not like they're willing to FAQ the game every week. People would hate that. But if it's all bundled into one app where your rules get updated automatically, and maybe you get a little reminder when there's an FAQ, the whole iterative process of fixing things will be so much faster and more pleasant. So I would push for digital rules.
+1, that's great.
That's a great one, Bridger.
What are you guys' thought process for picking secondaries? And what are the things you can what's some basic things you sort of consider, and what goes into the decisions you guys make?
So my general approach when I'm picking my secondaries is, first of all, it kind of starts with the army building, right? This goes hand in hand, and I'm of the philosophy of like, I like toolboxes. I like to be able to solve any given situation when I come up to the table, right? It means I'm not going to be able to just hammer some lists as hard as I might be able to otherwise, but I'm going to have the tools to be able to adapt to the situation. And so within that, when I'm looking at my secondaries, first off, I build a list that is able to achieve certain secondaries, right? I say, cool, engage on all fronts is amazing. This, again, is something that makes things like Def Coptas incredibly valuable in 9th edition, stuff like that. So I'll have a few units or sections of units that have tactics that allow me to do certain of these secondaries, right? While we stand, we fight is another big one that you can essentially build into your list. You can bake that in and say, I'm going to take this almost every single game, unless I'm playing against Raven Guard, and that's 15 points that, as long as I do my thing, I can get. Once I've done that to a certain degree, I start to think about point denial, right? So one of the big ones, the big gimmies on points is, of course, bring it down. I love transports. We love transports on the channel. They're amazing, but most of the time they give up a ton of bring it down points. So I start to think about, okay, is it worth it? Am I getting enough out of them, right? I love wave serpents. So although in many of my craft world lists, I'm giving up a ton of bring it down points, I feel confident that the amount of work they have to do to actually get those wave serpents, get those points, is worth the vast benefit of like these transports. So thinking about, when am I losing? Am I gaining something that's worth those points that I'm basically bleeding out? And that's generally how I approach my secondary.
For me, it's mostly a process of elimination. So I'll look at the 5 categories, and I'll say, cool, I don't have psychers, you don't have psychers. That's one category down. And I'll go through and I'll say, what is even feasible in this game? I can knock off Bring It Down. They don't have vehicles. Or I can knock off Headhunter. They don't have characters. Once you pick one, maybe I play Custodes, so I'm going to take attrition almost every game. That knocks out an entire column for me because I'm just going to pick attrition. The other 2 or 3 don't really matter. And so once you get down to just a few options left, you're like, cool, I have a discrete decision between this secondary and that one, instead of looking at 15 and trying to pick 3.
Yeah, that is okay. So that's absolutely where I start as well, just what Bridger's saying. And then what I use to pick between what's left often can come down to a mental arithmetic of what you think your opponent's taking. And is there a secondary that you're picking that could also help you stop their secondary? Or vice versa? Is there a secondary you're picking that in the natural course of their game, their secondary, that they're going to be able to deny you? Because you want to give them bad choices. A choice of like, hey, I'm either going to stop your secondary or I'm going to get mine. Not that I'm getting both at the same time. You don't want that. And so that could be a really important factor because it's just not enough to get your secondaries or to try to get your secondaries. You have to, at least in my mind, plan to deny almost all the points from one secondary of your opponent. Like pick one of their secondaries and take it to 0 if you can. And then that's one of the most reliable ways to win in 9th.
That's a great one, Brian. This question's directed specifically to Brian. Have you ever considered starting an OnlyFans page to support a local charity where members can get pictures of you wearing sweet sweaters?
It might already be out there if you look hard enough.
Oh.
I'm always complaining about how hot it is, but that's when you're wearing all the layers. If it's just the sweater, I think it's totally manageable. So there might be something to this.
Tabletop Titans calendar coming to you guys, 2021.
I'd buy it.
I'll tell you what, we turn off the stream, we turn on a different stream.
That's
right.
How can people get involved in that stream? That's what it'll.
Involved.
Give me that Patreon top level.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
That's right. We also do a ASMR with dice in our mouth. It's quite good.
Perfect for what you paid.
This one comes from me. I'm actually really curious. What are some of your favorite units right now in 9th edition?
Ooh. You guys go first.
There's so many. Anything that makes you fight last. So the Biologus Putrefier and the Judicar, both of those make your opponent fight last. They're so strong. Oh my god.
That's favorite because strong, but favorite because cool. Like Incarn.
So you pick favorite because cool.
Yes.
The Incarn has always been one of my favorite models. It just twists all the rules of the game, and you have to second guess like every decision playing against it.
Well, I'm so glad that she's back with the heroic intervention. Fix.
Oh, yes.
yes.
Can
So
actually
good.
put it in 9th edition again. It's on the shelf for the better half of 8th edition for me, but I'm having so
Right.
much fun in 9th edition with you.
Yeah, exactly. So the unit I'm loving is the Sky Reavers. They have everything that makes a good 9th edition unit, right? They're very durable, they're very fast, they're very flexible. They're good against vehicles, which are amazing in the new edition, and I'm just obsessed with them. That's why I have 15 in my list, and they're everything that's great in the world, and they bring me so much joy.
It's not like the Curve Falls is a good stratagem or anything like that.
Yeah. So good.
What armies are you all thinking for competitive play at the moment?
So
Or like favoring?
Yeah, totally. I've been giving this a lot of thoughts because obviously we've been playing a ton of different armies and sort of asking my question of, no, really, what would I actually take to a tournament right now? And I'm between two. I think I'm finally coming to narrowing that down to one, but I've been really loving playing Death Guard. They're amazing, they're flexible, they're durable. And then also Harlequins for exactly the same reason.
Yes.
And I think they're honestly going to be my number one moving forwards for playing them, just because I think they're definitely harder to play than the Death Guard. I'm definitely going to lose a lot of games really badly before I get the hang of them. Once again, I've always run them as like combined with Ynnari or whatever, and so I'm kind of new to running pure Harlequins, but so excited for them. So that's me.
Pop quiz, hot shot. What mask do you run? What mask do you run?
So I'm going Frozen Stars. I know. So I started with Soaring Spite, which I think is great. But I think so. Here's the thing. I think I'm going to lose more in the beginning with Frozen Stars than I would have with Soaring Spite. But I think in the long run, Frozen Stars gives me more tools to do what I want.
Two
I
wrong
get good at
answers.
Brian's all about his. You're still on the Silent Shroud train, right?
I mean, I was for 8th, but I've always really loved Midnight Sorrow, and I would encourage Harlequin players out there, try Midnight Sorrow. There's a lot going on there with that extra movement, and you can still get a lot of that utility out of the extra attacks that you can sort of with Frozen Stars with the Midnight Chime, because you really only sort of need that one big turn in an assault. A lot of other times you're overkilling anyway, so try it out. It's really insanely good, and especially in a situation where you have to make your charges. So that extra movement that you can get from falling back and also from your consolidates are basically setting up to make sure you make your next charges to fall in turns and stuff like that. It's
Right, I love that. It's all about that flexibility. That kind of sounds like it's a combination of the two that I had mentioned, which I think is really cool.
For me in 9th edition, I'm like simultaneously super stoked that my Golden Boys are like a tier 1 army for once, but I'm also really sad because there are no tournaments to play in. So I have I can't have my cake and eat it too. I just have these amazing units that I can only play with Brian and Adrian. I think by the time tournaments come back around, I'm really liking Blood Angels. Looking at the reveals for new Marines, or old Marines, I guess, 2 Wound Death Company with Chainswords at -1 AP. They have 8 attacks on the charge or something stupid. It's going to be crazy.
That'll be devastating, yes.
Yeah, I wonder how many points I think will be the determining factor on that one. But certainly sounds amazing.
But Bridger, when will you abandon Dreadhost and start moving to Shadowkeepers?
Never. Not in a million years.
All the hipster moves today.
Oh man. So for me, so Tau was like the only competitive army I played, and they are awful at the start of 9th. They I'm gonna work so hard to make them work, but it's because I'm working so hard, not because they're good. That army has taken a huge plunge, and it was already a very difficult army to play competitively. So I'm probably going to abandon them. I love the Custodes as well, but I'm not going to pick it because Bridger did. So Custodes have traditionally been my second favorite. I have quite a few Space Marines, and I'm really excited to put them on the table. My very first Space Marine chapter, and the one I have the most of, is Salamanders. And the Salamanders really, I'm excited. The previews to Melta getting better and the previews to Flamers getting better. And they're already a good Legion or a good chapter. With those things changing, I'm really excited to see my Salamanders continue to shine. So probably my Salamanders will be one of the armies that I'm taking the most often.
Nice. Going back to Tau, we have a lot of Tau players in our Discord channel. What do you think they need right now to be a little bit more viable in 9th edition going forward?
They need a complete change to everything. The problem is that Tau is a house of cards, right? You can't just change one thing, everything's interconnected. So, everyone hates drones. So it's cool, you nerf drones, but then battlesuit keyword, which the whole army's built off of, now tumbles as well. And then the whole durability, which was the army's key strength, goes away. And then, it's what identity does the army have? You could think of them as a shooting army, but they're actually not. Half the game outshoots Tau turn for turn. Durability was the only thing that made that shooting meaningful. And so they're not necessarily that fast. They're not that mobile. They certainly don't fight or psychic. So they need a big rethink. And one of the things I always have traditionally pointed to is if anyone played the GW Apocalypse game that they released, that rule set, I only got to play a handful of games. I really loved it, but they had completely rethought Tau for that game. Tau didn't have Overwatch, and Tau couldn't fall back and shoot, but they could shoot in combat with everything. And they shot in combat in the fight phase. And so they fought with their guns rather than fighting with their fists or swords. And it was super cool. And we see a bit of that now with Riptides being able to shoot into combat, but they can only do that in the shooting phase, not in the combat phase. I don't know. Maybe something like that would be really cool, but I don't know how to balance any of this. But I do think the army needs a complete rethink.
What were you working on before abandoning Tau going forward? Is there anything that you think is most viable?
Yeah. Farsight Enclaves is by far the most viable. Commanders are still really solid. And I really am taking a lot more of the mobile vehicles. So Piranhas, Petras, even Devilfish, because these things can run up and charge your opponent. And I can engage, my entire opponent so that they can't engage me. And that's the tactic that I'm going with. That's a tactic you're going to see in our tournament games. And it's going to work. It's a strong play style. The question is, is it strong enough to come to the top of the pile? You're going to have to tune in and find out.
Thank you guys very much for coming on. It's been great having a chat. And honestly, it's a little starstruck though, hearing you guys talking to us rather than just creeping on the stream and hearing what you guys would have to say.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
But yeah, thank you guys so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Definitely looking forward to talking with you guys more.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, guys.
We'll see you all out there on the battlefield.